So Rich, I was on vacation last week. My family went to Hilton Head. This is my wife and the kids. Really good time. And for any of you who have been to Hilton Head or who go every year, I know there's a lot of you that probably do. There's a guy who does like children's songs in this one area, this little cove. And we went one night to kind of hang out and like sing some songs, have a good time, family time. Is a very, very, quintessential kind of family atmosphere. And he would have these kids go up on stage, okay? And they would sing, right? Well, during the week, I swear everyone we met was from Ohio. Like someone was from Ohio. Like there was some Cincinnati connection or Columbus or even Cleveland, but everyone seemed to be from Ohio. And my wife and I are sitting there, my kids are down sort of closer to the singer and dancing around and having a good time. And this one kid goes up. And when he goes up, the person's like, hey, where are you from? What are you going to sing? And the kid goes, oh, I'm from Seattle. And I looked at my wife and I said, wow, that's a long way. Not only is that a far away to get here, but they're not from Ohio. Like everyone was from Ohio. And then he goes, what are you going to sing? And the kid starts singing. He sings the Cincinnati Bengals touchdown song. I'm JJ, and last year I tried my hardest to become a best ball bro. I drafted over 500 teams, I talked to some of the most successful best ball players in existence, and I admittedly had mixed results. So this year, I'm going to chase that title once again. My plan is to max enter DraftKings Millionaire Maker, and I'm going to document all of it while talking to the brightest best ball minds on the planet. Last year, I didn't quite get there, but this year, this is going to be the year where I officially become a best ball bro. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Bestball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Bestball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Bestball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. I'm drafting over there all the time. It's an absolute blast. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft a $20 best ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Now back to the show. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, joined as always by Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
Doing great, JJ. It's the heart of the World Series of Poker, so I've been watching a ton of that, supporting my guys over at Poker Go. $10 million up for grabs in the desert, so it'll be a fun next week and a half over there, enjoying all the poker stuff. And now digging back into the best ball streets, training camp, preseason, right around the corner, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's July, right? I just went on my family vacation. Back from the vacation, I am drafting and ready to do this. Today, we are going to talk about kind of it's kind of like a mid-summer update with best ball drafts and such, because we are into July now. I am now 55, maybe a little bit over 55, because I think I drafted a couple more since I pulled these numbers, but I'm 55 millionaire contests in, so I have less than 100 to go, which is kind of daunting sounding, but it's July 8th at the time of this recording. I think I'm pacing okay enough, right? I mean, if I need to really like beef it up, I'm trying to do 2 or 3 a day at this point. So I actually haven't drafted any today, but I did pull my exposure numbers, and we're going to walk through it, and I'm going to explain why I've drafted as much as I've drafted some of these guys. At least like given my experience last year in max entering this stuff and playing a high volume of best ball drafts last year, I realized this year that I didn't want to like be overly cautious with my exposure stuff until maybe mid-July. Like I just wanted to draft who I thought was the best players in those rounds. And I do think like we'll go over the percentages. It's actually kind of evened out. It's not like that crazy. I don't have like insane, 45, 50, 55% exposed players, but there are some guys who I think I'm a little bit too much, I have too much exposure of and too little of that we'll talk through. So we'll go position by position today and, talk through it. I would love to hear Rich's reaction to some of this stuff too, as sort of the ears, as a listener, if you will, because I've been talking about players on the show and we'll see how much that's matched to my actual drafting.
There'll be some matching here right off the bat at quarterback position because your top four are Drake May, Bryce Young, Jordan Love, and Aaron Rodgers. I'm specifically interested to hear about Yin's new quarterback at the end there, Aaron Rodgers, and whether or not your exposure is more pre-signing or post-signing and what your thoughts are on the guy moving forward.
Yeah, look, I got more with Aaron Rodgers pre-signing. But here's the thing. I do think that part of the reason why I have 13% Rodgers, so the ranges here are 13% to 18%, and a lot of quarterbacks are tied at 11%. So as usual, quarterback is not that high from an exposure perspective. I think last year my highest roster quarterback was like 15%. But Drake May, Bryce Young, they're both at 18%. Jordan Love, 15%. Aaron Rodgers, 13%. I got Rodgers before the signing happened, assuming that he was going to go to Pittsburgh. But I still have drafted him after the fact because I don't think that from a range of outcomes perspective, his outcome is necessarily so significantly worse or different than some of the pocket passers that are sort of in the tier above him. I think that we often look at Arthur Smith and correctly peg him as a run heavy, conservative kind of offensive coordinator. But there was a season in there where he had Matt Ryan and they were like seventh in the league in pass rate that year. I do think, and there's been some quotes from Arthur Smith that allude to the fact that, oh, I've got Aaron Rodgers now, I don't have to be as run heavy as I've been in the past. Of course he's going to be run heavy when he's got Kenny Pickett. Of course he's going to be run heavy, when he has Justin Fields or even Russell Wilson to a degree where he can, chuck it deep and have a high A dot and sort of run that, play action offense. So, I am sort of like trying to lean into the narrative and be contrarian from the standpoint that maybe the Steelers are not as run heavy as people are just assuming they will be. And Aaron Rodgers maybe isn't as dusty. I mean, I've been on record saying that I don't think that he is necessarily as bad as people think. And that's not just the Yinzer in me. That's the fact that he goes to New York, tears his Achilles like the third, whatever. What play was that? You probably know as a Jets.
Play number 4. I was in the building in section 206 right in front of me. He sat down and I was in a malaise for about the next couple hours.
Yeah. And then so he's gone for that whole season, comes back next year, or last year it was. And, he struggled a little bit to start the year, but he came on a little bit more in a weaker schedule during the back half of the season. He had Devontae Adams and such. But I think you can at least tell the story that, hey, this is an older veteran quarterback coming off a torn Achilles, and maybe he wasn't 100%, versus especially what he was saying to the media and such, right? And so I think there's at least a story here that we can tell ourselves that he's not as horrendous of a fantasy asset as people think. And then on top of that, I've leaned in a lot more to the 3 quarterback build. And that's what a lot of these numbers and such show. Like Bryce Young, in my opinion, he's in that next tier, sort of that like second to last tier, if you will, of quarterbacks or so. But like Bryce Young to me should be in a tier up based on when he came back from injury last year, he averaged over 5 points per game with his legs, which is a number that we only see from like the most mobile quarterbacks. And that was over 10 games. And so they add Ted McMillan. What if Bryce Young is able to be a really good fantasy asset, like a fringe QB1? I think that's in his range of outcomes here. Drake May, I think, has just been undervalued all offseason. So it's just been pretty easy to get him. And then Jordan Love, part of the pocket passer cluster that's in there, he's part of it, I should say. But there's that pocket passer cluster of like him and CJ Stroud and all these other dudes. The reason I gravitate towards Jordan Love is because there are so many outs with Love to get stacks. And one of those guys, actually a couple of those guys, we'll be talking about in a bit, but there are outs. Like you can get a naked Jaden Reed or Matthew Golden and say, hey, maybe I'll get Jordan Love, maybe I won't, because I think both of those guys are fairly priced, so I'll draft them. And then, oh, okay, Jordan Love's available, I'll draft Jordan Love. Or you just go naked Love and you're able to still, sometimes you can just get Love and Tucker Kraft at like a turn, and so you get a stack there. Or you just wait a little bit and you get Romeo Doubs. So there's reason, I think, to get Jordan Love, because he just allows a more flexible starting lineup. And I think he has just as good of a range of outcomes as CJ Stroud or some of these other pocket passer types, especially because the Packers are a team that are big regression candidates to throw the ball a lot more this year.
Love, the only player on this list that the market has cooled on since we started, down half a round. Both May and Bryce Young are up half a round since we started. And of course, Aaron Rodgers is up heaps. He's up 31 picks since we started because he did officially sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers. There is a quarterback who you are underweight on right now that you want to get a little bit more of. He was an MVP candidate last year. Who is it?
It's Lamar Jackson. And look, I don't say that as in like I'm fading Lamar. I have 4% Lamar right now out of these drafts. I just haven't really been getting him where because for whatever reason, I don't know if other people are experiencing this. Maybe this is a small sample size thing, but I've noticed that Josh Allen slides in drafts more than Lamar does, even though Josh Allen will have the higher ADP. Like it's a really weird phenomenon where like Lamar often will just like be concrete cemented right in that middle of the third round. Whereas I've gotten Josh Allen in the early fourth round frequently. Like it's not a shock when that happens. And so I've just kind of gotten the falling value, and that's just been Josh Allen more frequently. And that's why Lamar Jackson's kind of at a lower, exposure rate. But I do want to get that up at least a little bit. I don't think I'm going to be over the 8% mark with a Lamar whenever I can get Jalen Hurts, later and get a better value, in my opinion, on a guy like Hurts or, Josh Allen's falling. But I do want to be I want to be in like that maybe 6% range.
Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are the cover of Lethal Weapon right now, back-to-back in ADP, 29.3 and 30 respectively. But Allen is falling sharply, down 7 picks since we started doing this. So there definitely seems to be a little bit more course correction on Allen as opposed to Lamar. Let's go to running back. Some more takes here, stronger takes, deviations from the average. And we'll start with a pair of post-hype rookies, Marshawn Lloyd and Jalen Wright. Then we got Steady Eddie and a great offense, Justice Hill, Bashal Tootin, and Travion Henderson, a pair of rookies there. Lloyd and Wright are above the quarter mark, 29%. Justice Hill's right there at 25%. And then Tootin and Henderson both come in at 22%.
Yeah, look, I'll talk about the Jags backfield all together right now because Travis Etienne, I do want to get a little bit more of. Like, I've had Etienne ranked ahead of Tootin. It's just been something that I think early on I was a little bit too heavy with Tootin, and I didn't draft enough Etienne. And now, I wish that mix was a little bit closer than it is because Etienne's at like 8%. And so, yeah, like I like the ambiguous backfield. I like the Jags to improve as an offense this year under Liam Cohen. There's a lot to like about Jacksonville, and that's why their players are littered throughout the late round draft guide right now. So that's the dynamic between Travis Etienne and Bashal Tootin. When it comes to Tank Bigsby, I think that's the of the three. Like, I've gotten Bigsby in Jag stacks at times just because he falls a lot further than those two do. And if there is a falling value out of the backfield, it's usually Tank Bigsby. But I don't think Bigsby is going to be the one that emerges from that backfield. I've seen the comps of like, is Tank Bigsby the actual Bucky Irving? Because Bucky Irving didn't necessarily have the best receiving profile, et cetera, and he's more of that like elusive, between the tackles or grinder. I don't see that with Tank Bigsby. He has had a horrific yards per out run and efficiency as a receiver. He's only gotten, I think, a career like 12 targets. I mean, he doesn't have that much work through the air throughout his 2-year career so far. I liked Bigsby as a prospect just fine, but I just don't think they're going to use him enough as a receiver for me to really justify, being overweight on Bigsby. So that really shrinks that ambiguous backfield down to Tootin and ETN, and I'm going to throw darts at both of them. Travion Henderson, it's just a situation. He's an elite prospect. It's a full PPR format. I'm not into Ramondre Stevenson for a lot of reasons. Again, you can check out the draft guide for some of those reasons. Justice Hill is a combination of zero RB building or hero RB building, right? You're just kind of getting some production late because if the Ravens do fall in those negative game scripts, we'll probably see a decent amount of Justice Hill as we did last year. But also Jordan Love, I just mentioned I have 15% Jordan Love, and that's who they face in week 17. So I get a bring back late of Justice Hill. It's an easy one to do. But the two guys that I have the most exposure to right now, again, I'm kind of glad that I don't have high exposure to like earlier round picks because that means that there's just a lot of eggs in those baskets. I mean, Travion Henderson's round 6-ish guy. That's a little bit scary, I guess. But the two guys that are highest are Jalen Wright and Marshawn Lloyd. Marshawn Lloyd, Josh Jacobs is coming off a high volume season. People forget that Marshawn Lloyd exists because of what happened to him last year. He has big play upside, though. He's athletic. He could be a bell cow, hypothetically, in a situation where Josh Jacobs were to go down. And I think there's opportunity for him to maybe even just get some work with Josh Jacobs in the lineup to keep Jacobs fresh. It's not that I'm saying that, Jacobs is someone that you got to avoid at all costs. It's not that. This is me just playing the range of outcomes here. And Jalen Wright, I mean, I talk about him. He was an update in the draft guide this past week as a late round dart throw. Devon Achane had a 58.5% running back rush share per game rate last year, which isn't like that insane. Like we know that Achane's value comes in the form of receiving. And that leaves a lot of work for another running back to be like a 1B in that offense. And I think right now, Jalen Wright is the only guy. You get Alexander Madison, you have Ollie Gordon, you have these other pieces, but he's the guy that was there that's been in the system and that they drafted and that works in this system, right? Like he is a player who can do what this Mike McDaniel system wants his running backs to do. And so Jalen Wright, to me, in a best ball environment where he can maybe have a random spiked week that wouldn't be predictable, but then also has the upside of if Devon Achane, who I've also drafted a good bit of, but if Achane does get hurt, then Jalen Wright might not be a bell cow, but he would be the 1A in that offense, I think.
Jalen Wright creeping up 18 picks since we started doing this. That's a round and a half. So there's a steady drumbeat in support of Wright. You can still get him even with that surplus at the end of the 14th round. So still value to be had in Jalen Wright. We move to receiver. Romeo Doubs leads the way, 27% exposure. Two other guys in the 20s, Devon Vele and Keenan Allen, whose ADP will rise, as you predict here, after signing. And then a couple in the high teens, Darnell Mooney at 18% and many tied at 16%.
Yeah, I got a lot of guys at like the 16% range that I didn't shout out here. Devon Vele is probably my scariest because I don't even think that he's necessarily that good.
This seems like a very strong player take, Devon Vele, to have this. It feels like you're planting a flag here.
It's strange because I didn't like him at all as a prospect because he was like 27 years old, 26 years old. But I think like when you look at the Broncos, there's a very real chance that they spread the ball around a good bit in that offense. Like I like Marvin Mims, especially in season longs. I think Mims has sort of that plug and play ceiling that we could see in a managed league. And I like him in best ball. I like the Broncos in general. Like I've drafted a good bit of Bo Nix. He was one of the 11% quarterbacks that I have. I've drafted some Evan Ingram, RJ Harvey. I'm still going after. I have a ton of J.K. Dobbins. I think Dobbins has been someone who's been undervalued, since he signed there. But there's just other players like Pat Bryant, we're all kind of assuming would play the slot. And I've drafted him. Don't get me wrong. Like I've written newsletters about Pat Bryant being someone that we should be drafting. But with that being said, I don't want to be so firm in a take of a player that I don't think was necessarily like an elite player. I know that he's been comped to Michael Thomas by Sean Payton, and that's really exciting. But at the same time, I want to be realistic and say, okay, Devon Vele played in the slot, had a solid rookie season. Troy Franklin, didn't have a good rookie season. You have Marvin Mims and Cortland Sutton. What if Devon Vele is just the starting slot for Denver this year? And in a full PPR environment, there could be opportunity for Devon Vele to see a 20% target share in a game here and there, or 25% share here and there if he does lock in that role. And then all of a sudden he catches 5 passes for 50 yards and maybe finds the end zone in a game, and he's very usable, right? And you're getting him in the last round. And not only that, I'd be curious, I haven't looked it up or like checked or anything, because there is data that they're publishing over on DraftKings right now where you can look at draft results for this contest. But I haven't seen how frequently Vele, because Vele will go undrafted in some drafts, in a large number of these drafts. And so that's also leverage for me, because if Vele does well, then obviously that's fewer teams and fewer players in the contest overall that would be able to benefit from it.
No player in the entire National Football League that plays the wide receiver position has moved up more since we started doing this show for season 2 than Pat Bryant, up 28.6 spots.
Really?
So you are fading the steam and going ultra leverage here by pivoting to Vele.
Well, what's interesting, like I said, I'm still getting Bryant. Like, I think I still have like I'm over 8% for sure with Pat Bryant right now. It's more so like I'm buying into the Broncos offense. And this is it's because again, you can get a guy like Bo Nix naked in your draft because there are so many guys. You don't need Cortland Sutton to make it work, right? And so that's part of the reason. And also you get bringbacks. Like if you get some Kansas City players, I drafted some Isaiah Pacheco, then I can get a Vele late and just have a mini game stack going for that week 17. So that's sort of why Vele is here. I'm now that I'm like looking at it and being like, wow, 22%, like that's kind of scary. But it's less scary when it's a 20-round draft, when, I do think that there's at least this chance that he gets some production this year. I probably want to be around, maybe 16% at the end of the day if his price does hold. He's been getting some steam out of Denver. Like I'm surprised that there hasn't been that much movement with him throughout the offseason, just because, I get it. Like I'm getting Pat Bryant, like I said, but I do think that Vele should be getting a little bit more love. The Keenan Allen thing, I'm at 20% Keenan Allen right now. Keenan Allen's not on a team right now, but my speaking to other Bestball bros and just kind of reading the market, sounds like when he signs, based on what we've seen historically, when he signs with a team, his ADP is going to rise. And so this is me saying, I'm going to get Keenan Allen now and hope that he goes somewhere really great. And if he goes somewhere really great, I mean, why couldn't he get into the 11th or 12th round of these drafts? Like, I think that's pretty reasonable if he finds the right spot. But even if he doesn't, his ADP is probably it's not going to drop, I don't think, right? Like it would probably stay relatively stagnant. So that's why Keenan Allen is at 20%. And then Darnell Mooney, just a really easy target share projection for him, in my opinion. A lot of the later round trends at wide receiver kind of favor him that I talk about in the draft guide. He's someone that I'm going to be targeting this year in every format. And also, you get a pretty attractive week 17 game, in my opinion, because you get the Falcons and Rams. And if you get Puka, if you get Devontae Adams, which I'm drafting both of them, then it's easy to bring it back with Darnell Mooney.
On Keenan Allen, yeah, there's no scenario in which he gets signed where I don't think his ADP gets bumped, right? Because if a team signs him out of desperation, that means that they have a wide receiver room that is in need of a veteran presence who is going to command targets. And on the other side of the spectrum, if it's a good offense that perhaps suffers an injury during training camp or preseason, then there's going to be unassigned targets that could then go to this player who's all of a sudden in a good offense. So yeah, it's hard to see a scenario with which Keenan Allen gets signed. I mean, there's a world where he doesn't get signed. These things happen. But
sure,
if he gets signed, I don't see a world where his ADP doesn't go up.
Yeah, look, as long as he's not going out there and saying like, "Hey, I'm thinking about retiring," which I haven't seen any sort of like reports, then I'm fine, because I think a team is gonna want Keenan out. Like he wasn't like horrific last year, or as horrific as like the narrative kind of says. Like I'm looking right now at his per route run stuff. His yards per route run did drop to like 1.36, which is not great. But when you look at that within the context of the team, it was better than Roma Dunze's, for instance, last year. He was still seeing a target on 22% of his routes run last season. His ADOT was 10, which is pretty in line with what he's seen historically. Like, I don't think that he's necessarily completely toast. And he's the kind of wide receiver like a Anquan Bolden type wide receiver that could hypothetically go pretty long into his career as long as he is healthy, because he's never been a separation guy ever. That's not his game. And so I do think that he could find a slot role somewhere and just be a really reliable target there.
Yeah, this guy's going to beat zone until the day his legs don't operate, right? Because he's going to be able to find soft spots. He understands the route tree. And it probably was just an awful fit with a very chaotic Caleb Williams offense that wasn't like, we're going to hit our 3-step drop and get the ball out, right? Like that's where Keenan's going to operate well.
Well, if people are going to sit here making excuses for Rome Odunze, which I'm here for, like you can make excuses for Odunze, do the same thing for Keenan Allen, right? Like he was in the same offense, he's in the same system. I don't think that we can pick and choose just based on the fact that one guy's a second-year player and one guy's, a veteran in the league.
For sure. And then 2 players, single-digit percentage you're underweight on that you want to draft a little bit more, Jacoby Myers and AJ Brown.
Yes, look, the Jacoby Myers thing is more so just like he's really, really solid. I want to get at least to like 6 to 10% with him and just feel comfortable because he's just a solid player. And he's actually beat ADP pretty well over the last few years or couple years. The AJ Brown thing, in my head, I'm like, he is such a smash pick, right? I'm at 7% AJ Brown. I want to be at like 10 right now. But I haven't gotten a lot of that like 6 to 8 range in drafts. And I'm usually at like the anchors, right? So I'm like 1 to 3 or 10 to 12. And when you're in those positions, you're sitting there in the second round and you're like, I really want the emerging year 2 wide receiver or Nico Collins or someone like that over AJ Brown because what if this is the year that things start to go south for AJ Brown? I don't think that's the case. I actually think that if anything, he's like a hyper, like especially like if he falls in your season long league and stuff, he's someone that you should be targeting because Philadelphia is going to throw the ball more this year. It is almost definitely going to happen. If you look at the 7 teams since 2011 outside of Philadelphia that had pass rates under 45%, they were at like 41% last year. If you look at those 7 teams, all of them except for one, it was Baltimore with Lamar Jackson from 2019 to 2020. All of them, though, saw a massive increase in pass rate from one year to the next. And it's just because of regression. It's just things don't go as cleanly from one year to the next. Jalen Hurts had like 5 fewer pass attempts per game last year than what he's typically seen as starter in Philadelphia. So I think AJ Brown is a very, 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 very good pick. And it's just been weird that I haven't gotten more of him because I like him a lot. It's just there's so many other players in that range that are just so good. It speaks to what a lot of us are saying in the space right now is that this is the best first and like the first round into the middle of the second round, probably the best fantasy assets that I've ever seen covering fantasy football. Like if you like, it's kind of nice too, because typically we've seen like top 3, the front part of drafts have an advantage, just a natural advantage in terms of win rate in your typical fantasy league. And now once you get into like the back half of the second round, it's not as strong. Like you don't feel as good about Josh Jacobs as you do, like some of these elite wide receivers. And that's actually giving more of an advantage, I think, to the middle and the late parts of round 1, which we don't typically see. So I'm into basically any part of the first round at the end of the day, because you are getting an elite player early, but the second round's not as good. Whereas, in the middle and late first area, you're able to get really, really good second round picks.
I got to say, I think this AJ Brown stuff is a little disrespectful. Like this guy is like a walking 1,400 yards. So I find it hard to take both Drake and Ladd above him. And and based on historics, like you're saying, if we can expect the type of regression back to the mean with regards to passing volume from Philadelphia, like it's really hard for me to click these guys over AJ Brown.
Yeah, and look, trends really love year 2 guys, year 3 guys, like in the early rounds and players who are coming off of good peripheral seasons, but like AJ Brown has really good peripherals too. Like it's a boring pick, which is why people aren't as into it. And I keep thinking to myself, oh, there's going to be drafts where he falls a little bit because he does fall at times in these drafts and I'll just get him then. But I just that hasn't happened enough. Like I need to force it a little bit more, which is why I'm calling him out. I didn't talk about Romeo Doubs though either. Obviously the Jordan Love thing I talked about earlier. That's why Doubs is my number 1 exposed wide receiver at this point at 27%. it's just weird to me. Like, the dude led the Packers last year in target share per game, and he's going to be on the field in 2 wide receiver sets with Matthew Golden. Why are we, and not only that, you don't have Christian Watson healthy for the first at least half of the season. Dontavian Wicks has had plenty of struggles. I mean, I'll throw a dart at Wicks as well in Green Bay stacks, but Wicks has had his troubles. I think we're looking at an obvious 11 personnel set of Romeo Doubs, Matthew Golden, and Jaden Reed. Like, that's it. And in 2 wide sets, you're going to get Doubs and Golden. And so that's why I've been gravitating towards him and drafting him, more than I expected for sure. I just am baffled by his ADP at the end of the day. That's what I think he should be drafted at least around earlier in a best ball environment. Is his ceiling really high? No, I'm not going to draft a guy like this in season long, because it's not, he's more than likely not going to be a league winning player, but that kind of player can still win you a single week and be fine in this kind of environment.
It's just the boring pick. It's just what you said about AJ Brown. Like, people are staring down the barrel of Romeo Doubs and they're like, oh, let me take a Xavier Legette or Jalen McMillan, somebody else who's younger and exciting, as opposed to the guy who just keeps on doing it.
Yeah, who's just solid. I think he's a pretty easy bet to beat ADP in best ball, all while being on a team that should throw more, all while being on a team that could have that sort of outlier passing touchdown season, all that kind of stuff. And why not just feed into that? I mean, we're drafting Jaden Reed and Matthew Golden for the same. Obviously, there's the ambiguity of Golden, and Jaden Reed has been unbelievable per route run. But I do think that Doubs just kind of gets shoved aside because he's not that fun and not that intriguing, even though look what he did in the playoffs a couple of years ago. He's shown us a ceiling. Like, it's very possible that he could, win you a given week.
Tight end Brenton Strange leads the way at 22%. Trey McBride joins him above 20% at exactly 20%. Jatavian Sanders, Noah Gray, Tyler Higbee in the high teens. Let's talk tight end, JJ.
Yeah, so Brenton Strange last year in his 5 games with a 70% route participation, which I think he's going to hit pretty consistently in Jacksonville this year. He had a top 10 performance in 3 of those 5 games. Obviously, Travis Hunter is now part of the picture, but he should be the number 3 target in this offense, in this passing offense. Maybe De'Ami Brown sneaks in, but I think that we could project him for like a 15% target share in the offense. And he's cheap, at the end of the day. It's an ascending offense. It's one I want to invest in. So I'm drafting Brenton Strange. Trey McBride, I think this one is kind of self-explanatory, where I would rather be drafting him where he goes, because the opportunity cost, like I said, in the back half of the second round and into the third round, it's just not nearly as dramatic as it is where Brock Bowers goes, right? Brock Bowers, you're taking him over AJ Brown. You're taking him over Nico Collins or Drake London or someone like that. Whereas Trey McBride, you're taking him over T. Higgins, JSN, these players that aren't obviously as elite as, or in the most amazing circumstances from a JSN perspective, as we get with some of those other wide receivers in the early second round. And then also, if you get, the 101, which I've been fortunate to get probably more than expected at this point, then I like to bring Jamar Chase back with Trey McBride for that week 17 correlation. So I have a decent amount of Trey McBride. Jatavian Sanders, like a lot of these other guys, they're just late round dart throws because I'm going with 3 tight end builds. I'm just going to get these cheap guys. You guys should listen to the episode that I dropped in the late round podcast on Tuesday about the tight end dead zone, because this is the kind of range, like, you just want to throw darts at these guys as opposed to really staking claim and getting like Travis Kelce this year, who I think is probably the most overvalued player on DraftKings at this point. But Jatavian Sanders, 18% with him, probably too high. Probably want to bring that down a little bit. A lot of that has to do with me getting Bryce Young a decent bit, but Tommy Tremble had back surgery. He's supposed to be back, but who knows what happens? He had an injury this offseason, and you're getting a second-year tight end, so that's pretty intriguing. Noah Gray, I'm betting on Kelce winding down his career and really continuing on what we saw last year, especially with Rashee Rice out last year, in last year. Travis Kelce averaged like 5 PPR points per game, and that's in that limited sample. But Noah Gray was still getting some work. Like, he can still get some while being sort of a handcuff in that offense. So I like Gray, especially going back to liking Denver. I'm going to bring it back with Kansas City a little bit. He's a very cheap way of doing that. I like Brashard Smith as well. I've been doing that with their rookie back. But And then Tyler Higbee, I love Terrence Ferguson. Anyone who read the prospect guide knows that the model loves Terrence Ferguson. I just don't know if it's going to be a 2025 thing. And so I'm betting on Tyler Higbee here. It's fine if you want to draft some Ferguson. I've gotten him at times as well. Maybe we see a end of the season kind of performance from him. But we've seen Higbee thrive in this offense before. And so, given the fact that they don't have much outside of Adams and Nakua, I think that Higbee could carve out a 15% target share kind of role and give us some random spiked weeks, which is not difficult to do at tight end because all you need to do is find the end zone or just catch a few passes. So be getting Higbee a decent bit too.
Both Ferguson and Higbee took a hit when the Rams signed Devontae Adams. They both tumbled. Higbee a full round. Terrence Ferguson almost 2 rounds with the massive target share that probably is going to go to Tay's way. But yeah, that first year tight end, it's the toughest position to learn in the league. So tempering expectations there is probably a fair play. There is a guy who you were severely underweight on. He's attached to a quarterback who we've dumped on a couple times here on the podcast, and it's one Sam Laporta.
Yeah, I got to get a little bit more Laporta. I'm fine with being underweight on Laporta and underweight on Hawkinson and definitely underweight on Kelsey. But I should be more in that like 4 to 8% range with Laporta, and I'm only in the 2% range right now. Some of that just is team building. Some of it is me not realizing that I haven't gotten as much Laporta as I thought. So when I'm at that like into the 6th round, and if I drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown, which I have, I'm still drafting him. I just haven't clicked Laporta's name. It definitely plays into some of the trends that I talk about in the draft guide, but even still, I should have more Laporta than I do.
Speaking of, as we wrap up the tight end position, episode 999 on the precipice of 1,000. Can you believe you made it?
I know. Well, it's funny. Like I was talking to David Kitchen about this, and it's like, yeah, that's, episode 1000 is happening next week because I have a Perspectives episode this week. So next week will be episode 1000 of the Late Round Podcast. But I'm like, you know what? I've done like 60 Perspectives episodes at this point, and I've done, a lot of Becoming a Bestball Bro episodes. So like, is it episode 1000? It's episode 1000 of the solo show is what it really comes down to.
Yeah, artificial number. Leave it to JJ to be overly critical of the own numerology of his podcast releases.
Yeah, it's really my fault for numbering them in the first place. But anyway, we do have a guest today, Tom Strachan, writer, podcast host, editor at Fantasy Pros, great guy from across the pond. He's the co-creator of the Fantasy Football Sanctuary. He's a best ball streamer and analyst. We talk about optimal lineup construction, forcing 3 quarterback and 3 tight end builds, some low cost stacks, and so much more. So without further ado, here is my interview with Tom. All right, Tom, we're now into July. You being across the pond, you're probably in August at this point, right? That's how it works.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm just waiting for the season to start. It's just you guys being lazy, so catch up.
yeah, exactly. Typical Americans, right? Typical Americans. But we're now in July. Different parts of the summer, you might have different strategies when it comes to, approaching, the Millie, approaching these different best ball contests. Do you approach things differently when you are in August versus let's say May or early June?
Yeah, I think you can approach the best ball season as it is now in a kind of evolving way as it goes through. Early on, you definitely, like, the way I like to approach it is taking some slightly safer builds, taking some stuff where it's like, okay, well, I feel covered because I've got 3 quarterbacks. Like, I can go back to the year where I drafted far too much Trey Lance, and it's going, that was a year where 2 QB builds worked out poorly for me. But if I'd hedged a little bit earlier, then I would have had some more 3 QB builds that'd be safe. Now, by the time you got into training camp that year, you already started to hear whispers about how it wasn't necessarily as impressive as you might have hoped. So I think now is the time where you can start to take your stances. You can start to build your player takes. We've gone through the part where things maybe need to be a little bit safer. And now's the time where, you want to be in the coach speak index. You want to be reading the Athletic daily. You want to be paying attention on Twitter to the people who put out sensible information, who have the time to go through even more of this content than you do, and then use that to start try to create an edge. Like every year We always see running backs start to get pushed up around this time. And that's as people who perhaps slightly more casual than the people who are drafting hundreds of drafts tend to push those running backs up. So being ready to maybe fade some of those running backs who get pushed up past the point where you're comfortable with is something I've done in previous years. We also see rookie prices deflate around this time of year. Coming off the draft, they're always incredibly hyped. Everybody's reading the late round rookie guide and everybody's hyped and everybody's ready to go out and draft these guys. And then OTAs and minicamp hit and we start to see the prices subdue a little bit more. But now's the time to get back in on the ones who you've got conviction on, because this is as cheap as you're ever going to get them. And then the last part, which I kind of lean into heavily, is that by now we've gotten to know the parts of the draft where we can extract value. I know that Pat Corain talked about like drafting from back to front, the rotoviz principle that Sean Siegel talks about, and talked about guys like Rashad Bateman and Wan'Dale Robinson in that kind of area and leaning towards certain guys. That it all comes from that sort of stuff, knowing there's QB heavy areas of the draft, there's tight end heavy areas of the draft. Where do I want my exposures to be? So yeah, very much different drafts now to May when it's kind of just getting your first feel for the landscape.
Are you concerned at all about different combinations that you might have gotten early in the season? So just as an example, let's just say, over on DraftKings, you'll see Nico Collins and Brian Thomas, let's say, or a common pairing that you'll see at like the 1-2 turn area. If you get, let's say you get Nico in the first round and now, okay, it's been May, June, and most of July, and now we're into August, and we know that those ADPs have been relatively stagnant and in the same area throughout the summer. Are you then going to, instead of taking Brian Thomas, take a Rashee Rice or someone who is more on the other end of the second round to get sort of a unique combination there that others wouldn't get? Or are you still mostly playing the ADP game and the value game because you know that you just straight up like Brian Thomas more than Rashee Rice this year?
It's a really good question because it gets like, I think we all get a little bit bored with being on the turn by the time you've done 100, 200, 300 drafts. And it's like, okay, am I really just going to try and get the Joe Burrow double stack again? Right. Or am I going to try on the other end and mixing, as you said, like I'm on Ra and Brian Thomas or similar. And I can definitely see arguments for it. I've done drafts where maybe you pull Nico Collins to the first half, like the first 4 picks of the draft. And then if you do that, I feel like you only need that one pick to be incredibly different. And then the rest of your draft is going to bring you into different combinations. But generally speaking, it's not something I'm looking to do in the back half of the first round this year, because the back half of the first round feels really strong to me. There's about 4 or 5 guys in round 2 who I feel confident in and that I want combinations of them, looking at guys like Nico and Drake London, Nico and Derrick Henry, like all the way down to Nico and Brock Bowers. Like I want a mix of them, but I'm not necessarily going crazily out of the way to get it. I think with DraftKings releasing more pick by pick data this year than they ever have done, there's plenty of good information out there on what the combos are. Like Dan Falkenheim on Twitter and Chris Cash both wrote some nice stuff on there about it. And I think if you could just be a little mindful and not necessarily go out of your way to do this every time, then it can open up different builds and really help you if you can make it to week 17.
Yeah. Is there an optimal roster construction that you're striving for over on DraftKings?
I mean, it kind of comes down to how do you want to view optimal roster construction? Because there's one build that stood out massively over the years, and that's 3-6-8-3. So 3 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. You go back to 2022, and that was 18% of all drafts in the final were made up by 3-6-8-3. We don't have the data for the entire, almost million drafts that were done. Yeah. But we know it made up 18% of the final, so it must have been a fairly big number. And that was the only roster construction over 10% of the finalists that year. 2023, that jumped to 24%. Again, it was the only build above 13%. But then last year, it represented 34% of the 1,021 finalists. So, one of 3 teams, and it was the only build over 12%. So I think you can definitely look through a lens and say 3-6-8-3 has been consistently represented in the finals, and because of that, that's a build that we know works. The team that won it last year was a 3-6-8-3 team, and we talk about that more as we kind of get into it. But then the other teams who've won over the last few years, 2021 was a 3-5-10-2. Shout out to Felix who won that year. Great guy. 2022 was a 4-6-7-3. And then these last 2 years have been 3-6-8-3. So I think 3-6-8-3 is a comfortable build. It allows you to get 3 quarterbacks, 3 tight ends. It allows you to not be too light at running backs. And it allows you to be heavier on wide receiver, which we kind of want to be doing, as we can start up to 4 wide receivers every week, compared with even if you have a running back in the flex, that's only 3. So I do think 3-6-8-3 wants to be a healthy part of people's portfolios year to year, but the other builds that tend to do well are things like 3-5-9-3, 2-6-9-3, 2-7-8-3. But the thing that mattered beyond anything to do with roster construction last year was that the team who won it had Bijan Robinson at 6% ownership, Trey McBride at 6% ownership, and Ricky Pearsall at 7% ownership. They all scored 25 or more points, and they only had 3 players across their whole starting lineup who were over 10% rostered. And when you get to these finals, quite often it is top heavy. You're seeing, Jared Goff was on 35% of rosters. Brian Thomas Jr. was on 40% of rosters. So having those low owned players, I think, is almost as important, if not more important, than the actual makeup of your roster.
Yeah, I mean, squeaking by, right? And maybe not having the best roster imaginable in week 16, but just getting by and being able to get through into the final with those unique players, which unfortunately isn't totally in our control, but it is something to keep in mind, as you're sort of following your teams this year. And so you mentioned the 3-6-8-3, which seems to be a default build that as you're drafting, you just kind of gravitate towards. Like, even if you go more hero running back or wait for running back until like round 7 or so, you can kind of compile a decent amount of running backs from round 7 to round 12 or what have you, and 13, and still feel pretty good at running back to still stick with 6. But you're drafting 3 quarterbacks and 3 tight ends with that kind of build. Are you still doing that? I'm going to ask you for both quarterback and tight end here. Are you still going with 3 tight ends or 3 quarterbacks often if you get an elite player at that position? So at tight end, if you get a Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, George Kittle, are you still going with a 3 tight end build? And then at quarterback, if you're getting Lamar or Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts or Jaden Daniels, are you getting 3 quarterbacks in that kind of environment as well?
Yeah, so starting with tight end, I mean, well, let's go back to last year's winning team. They had Trey McBride, who went nuclear in week 17. The other 2 tight ends they had, Ben Sinnott and Theo Johnson. Now, Ben Sinnott had 4 weeks where he scored any points and only 1 over 3 points.
Yeah.
Theo Johnson was injured in week 13. He had 3 games over 8 points. So I think it's fairly safe to assume that Trey McBride was in that lineup for every single week apart from his bye week. Mm-hmm. So you can carry guys on DraftKings to a level I don't think you can in 18-round formats. I think generally one of the things that I've come to realize on that site is that you can get away with a little bit more. You can be a little bit heftier at certain positions and just carry players, not necessarily for safety, but to give you potential outs for upside. And my attitude to tight end comes back that I want guys generally who are stacked with my quarterbacks and correlate them, because it just makes dealing with this most unpredictable position in fantasy so much easier. And that kind of tends to lead me to 3 tight end builds. It also allows you to say, I'm going to shoot for upside on tight end late in drafts, because we've seen in 2023, Sam Laporta, Cole Kmet, Hunter Henry were all really good late round picks. Then Jonnu Smith and Zach Ertz last year were really good late round tight ends. So I'm fine with that. I know last year was kind of a good year for 4 tight end builds compared to previous, but I struggle putting that many eggs into the tight end position. And 3 kind of feels like the max that I tend to, and I feel quite comfortable with that. And I know some people prefer to build a bit more fragile when they've taken their elite tight end, but in general, I'm thinking I need in week 15, 16, 17, I need those correlations. I need those stacks. And I need that way of maximizing my score. So, yeah, generally speaking, it's 3 tight ends for me. But at quarterback, I'm not taking quarterbacks unstacked. And we could talk more about stacking and how often that's being done. But it's one of the principles of best ball that I just feel like even if it doesn't always work out, it's one that when it does work out, the 1% outcomes are so beneficial that I want to lean into them. And on DraftKings with the 300 passing yard bonus, if you have a quarterback who gets that 3-point bonus for the 300 passing yards and you've got a pass catcher who hits for 100 yards plus touchdowns, that's when you can separate in your 12-man pod. That's when you can find it easier to elevate. So having those kind of stacks through the playoff rounds matters to me. I think when we look at some of the previous winners, they haven't been teams who've overstacked. They've been teams that have gone skinny stacks, like quarterback plus 1 pass catcher, quarterback plus 2 pass catchers. So in general, I'm not going overboard with my stacks, but I want to build a team where I have monster upside at running back, wide receiver, and then if I can make the quarterback and the tight end positions just glue together, whether that's through bringbacks for week 17 or whether that's through stacks, I'm generally going there. And one area where I feel particularly confident with the quarterback position this year, it's kind of like round 8 through round 12. There's such a glut of quarterbacks, and especially on DraftKings where we see the quarterbacks, when we start to go, you can get shut out of the room quite quickly.
Yeah.
I feel like that range is probably going to be key between about round 8 and round 13, round 14 for both quarterback and the tight end position. And I think if you can hit on the best quarterback from that range and the best tight end from that range, then that might be enough to take you into a really profitable position this year.
Yeah, I mean, look, the quarterback position especially just goes and goes and goes in that range, and it seems like it's just it's just shrunk in terms of getting like the Bryce Youngs or the Aaron Rodgers of the world.
Yeah,
you can't get them as late as you could, at the beginning of the summer, and all that's doing for me at least is making me feel like I feel better and more okay with getting like Dak Prescott or Brock Purdy, because there's not as much opportunity cost whenever those other guys are then going, just a little bit later instead of a decent bit later, right?
Yeah.
And so to that point, though, does that mean that you're avoiding or not drafting as many of the early round quarterbacks this year?
No, not necessarily. I mean, look, I'm a Ravens fan, so I'm always going to be overweight on Lamar every year. Much like when Liam was on and talked about how he's always going to have exposure to Josh Allen. Like when you're a fan of these guys who give you the nuclear ceilings, it's very difficult to pass them up. But I want the guys who have the potential to the 300 passing yard games and the 100 rushing yard games. So it's like they can really elevate Lamar, Josh Allen. We've seen it. Jalen Hurts feels fine, feels undervalued. It feels like people are possibly dinging him a little too hard last year. Like, I think if you're not drafting Jalen Hurts, then you should be heavy on Saquon Barkley, expecting Saquon Barkley to be great again. I'm a little nervous about Saquon Barkley, so I'm finding it easier to, the double stack of AJ Brown and Devonta Smith with Jalen Hurts is achievable this year. I want exposure to that. And then Jaden Daniels obviously is definitely worth it. So yeah, I do like these guys, but it kind of comes down to a draft capital conversation. If I'm taking these, then I'm looking to maybe get one quarterback in the early double-digit rounds, somebody like CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, maybe even Justin Herbert. And then I'm punting the third quarterback quite late to really be maybe somebody like Daniel Jones, because my chips are kind of more in on him starting the majority of the season than Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So with DraftKings being a full PPR platform, do you think that going with a robust RB type strategy, like getting a running back with your first 3 picks, is it viable? Has data said anything historically? Is it something that you've done, or are you more, let's get an anchor, or let's go 0 RB and let's focus on the position that likely will hit the flex more frequently, in wide receiver on a full PPR platform, and kind of go that route?
Generally speaking, I've been more zero RB, hero RB, but last year felt like a year where you could change that because the rooms that we were being given because of ADP, and even to an extent this year, maybe we're still seeing it. And I remember doing streams last year, and if I started running back, all of a sudden the chat explodes.
Yeah,
Whoa, what happened
yeah,
to you? All that kind of stuff.
yeah.
It was there for you. So I don't know quite about robust because the wide receiver cliff edge can come and make it quite difficult. But I mean, last year's winner, they had Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson. So that was most likely a round one, round two double tap. They also then went on to have Bucky, who, you hit on the breakout running back, great. But then they had David Montgomery, who was kind of fine, lost for the back end of the season. Raheem Mostert, who gave you very little, and Justice Hill, who gave you mediocre returns. So that was just an example of a really smart build where they allocated the draft capital. It was done well. And I think that's what you have to do if you're going to go running back heavy in the first few rounds. I mean, Mike Leone wrote this in the Bestball Manifesto. You can either draft a lot of running backs or you can draft running backs early. You can't do both. So capping out at like 5 running back builds, 6 running back at the most, but really waiting on them. Like the robust build, 3 running backs through 4 rounds. Back in 2022, it was nearly 9%. It fell down to 6% in 2023. Last year, people just weren't doing it as much. I think out of the finals teams, 1,021 teams, before teams got to pick 60, generally speaking, most teams only had 2 running backs. 44% of teams had 2 running backs at that point. Only 1% had 4 or more running backs, and only 12% had 3 running backs. So people were leaning towards the wide receivers. And this played out as well because wide receivers were represented well. I mean, Brian Thomas was breaking out down the back end of the season. Obviously, Jamar Chase was incredible. But out of the finalist teams, 49% of them had taken 2 wide receivers within their first 36 picks because the guys you needed were those guys who were just hitting at the right time, like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, like we're all peaking right as the playoffs hit. So I don't think robust RB can't work. I just think it's incredibly difficult and you've got to thread a needle. And then when you do it, you need to hit on the wide receivers in the middle rounds. The guys like Vier Cooper Kupp had his incredible season. You need that kind of return from those rounds to make it work.
Yeah, and I know with my season-long analysis, wide receivers at the top versus running backs at the top generally have better hit rates. And that's even looking at players who played 8 or more games, and you're looking at it from a points per game perspective. So that's not even factoring in injury stuff or anything like that. If you want to say that running backs get hurt maybe a little bit more than wide receivers do, you got to spend up to get the elite wide receivers at the end of the day. It's a lot more difficult to find them in the middle and late rounds.
Yeah, and generally speaking, like over the last couple of years, we've seen the running backs towards the top have been healthier than the wide receivers.
Right.
Like I think it's like I can't remember the data off the top of my head, but like it's swung by about 1% or 2 in terms of average games played, and that percent matters a lot. Like, obviously, you don't want to count on this going forward, but maybe in 5 years, we sit here and go, you know what? Running backs, they found better ways to protect themselves, better ways to elongate their career. And if we just assume that running backs are going to keep getting injured at a way they did 5 years ago, that's when you can find yourself behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's why to me, like whenever I do that analysis, I'm just looking at what players who were healthy and who did play 8 or more games. I think a lot of times we overstate our assumptions of who gets hurt most and who, all that kind of stuff, or it's just easier to say, okay, assuming health, this is what goes down. And what goes down is that you do see a little bit better of a hit rate at wide receiver than you do at running back. And it's just going to be pretty difficult to hit those really, really high ceilings at wide receiver. It's especially true in season long because there's the predictability aspect. Backup running backs are naturally going to be more predictable than a backup wide receiver is, just because they step in and the coach says, here, take the ball and run the football and you can accumulate fantasy points. Whereas a wide receiver, there's a lot more nuance to it. You got to get open, you got to be on the same page as the quarterback and all that stuff. It's a little bit more talent driven. So I do think that that's one of the reasons why you're likely seeing what you're seeing too in the best ball data is that wide receivers don't emerge the way that running backs do at times. When you need that like 2-week stretch. I mean, I have pooped on Zamir White like crazy over the last year and a half, but I can't deny that he was a decent enough fantasy asset down the stretch a couple of years ago. And that was someone who was not on many people's radars that year, at least from a season long perspective. But we knew going into that week, okay, he's probably going to be the bell cow, so we can throw him into our lineup. That kind of thing. Yes, you'll get the rookie wide receivers that'll break out and stuff like that. But you're generally going to see like the high end outcomes from those earlier round wide receivers, which is likely why you're seeing what you're seeing from a best ball standpoint. Go ahead. Were you going to add something?
No, I was just going to say, I think it's like, in general, we've got to this point with best ball as well, in particular, where best ball content is like, I can click on YouTube and there'll be 3 or 4 people I follow streaming at any one time. And there's very much been a comfortability within the content creator space of going wide receiver heavy. And Pete Overzet talked about this last year, like how to avoid the wide receiver avalanches. And it's just always balancing what the room is giving you with kind of what you want to hit. And there's definitely been times where I've been guilty of trying to force a structure or trying to force something because historically that's been something that's paid off. But when the room and the ADP is so drastically different, then we do have to adjust. And what I'm still trying to get my head around is, has it changed drastically enough from last year that we shouldn't be leaning into the tendencies of like, slightly heavier running back drafts?
Yeah, and I think on DraftKings as well, and this is kind of like taking what you just said to a kind of different level and into a different conversation in a way. But I do think that on DraftKings, that what I found is that when you're drafting in the early rounds, like round up through like round 7, round 8, I found myself this year, because this is the first year where I've gone more heavy on DK. I found myself having pretty uncorrelated lineups at times through like round 7, but I do think the extra couple rounds helps a little bit with you feeling okay about being a little bit less correlated through the first couple, like through the first like 6 or so handful of rounds. And I say that to what you were just speaking to in terms of like forcing things and, drafting positions that you might not feel comfortable drafting. I think it's okay to kind of get the falling values instead of like forcing the issue of, oh, I really want a 0 RB lineup, or, oh, I really want just this hero RB or anchor RB lineup because this is what seems to be optimal. I think on DraftKings in particular, you can make up for what might not be the most correlated lineup early on. Maybe it's because of the extra couple rounds. Maybe it's because of the demographic that's drafting there. I'm not sure, but it does seem like you can recover a lot easily or more easily on DK than I've experienced before, at least.
Yeah, and I think just to a wider point, I think going back to something I said earlier, I think you can just get away with more on DraftKings if you hit on the right combination of players. So the team that won it in 2022 had Russell Wilson stacked with Jerry Jeudy from their Broncos days. That was the only QB pass catcher combination on the team. They then had a team stack of the Eagles, Kenneth Gainwell, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith without Jalen Hurts. And that was it. There were no more correlations on the team. They had 4 QBs, including Jordan Love, who barely played that year, Jacoby Brissett, who I can't even remember whether he touched the field. And then it was Trevor Lawrence, Russell Wilson. What they did have was they had Christian McCaffrey, they had A.J. Brown, they had Mike Evans, who scored a ridiculous amount of points in championship week. They had Devonta Smith, T.J. Hawkinson, who was very good that year. So they just hit all the right parts, and they did it in a way that worked. So the big thing that I have learned with DraftKings is understanding that each room is going to be completely different from the last, and being able to say, okay, I'm not going to be able to go through my checklist of my ideal draft and go, I would like this correlation, I would like this stack, I would like this many wide receivers by this point. Just adjust, take the best players that you can at the best moments, and be mindful towards the back, as you said, about, can I add some correlation? Can I add something as a tiebreaker that's going to help my roster a little bit? And if not, then just lean into the picks that you've got conviction on.
Yeah. Are there any stacks right now that you've sort of gravitated towards most, that you've been drafting most?
Yeah, so kind of the cheaper ones, the Titans and the Panthers. I think it's really easy to add those as late round stacks. Like, I'm quite high on the Titans in general this year. I think Cam Ward's going to really help that offense. I think the coaching staff has had their hands tied behind their back so far since they got to Tennessee. And I think this year, with the new offensive line, it's going to make a big difference within reason as we talk about rookies.
Yeah, of course.
And then the Panthers, it's just so easy to get to that range and go, okay, whether I've got Tet or not, I'm looking at Adam Thielen, I'm looking at Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, I'm looking at Jatavian Sanders as a last round dart throw. I'm just taking Bryce Young and saying I'm just going to add a couple of these pieces. And then the one which I can't get enough of is the Rams double stacks with Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, and Matthew Stafford. Like, Matthew Stafford last year, I think he had 10 games where he failed to score pass for more than a single touchdown. I think he's due positive regression. I think that Puka Nacua could be due some, because through 2 years, we've only seen 9 touchdowns from him. He commands the volume, which on a PPR site has definitely been enough over the last couple of years. But if he could add more touchdowns, that would be fantastic. And then Adams, I think Adams definitely brings that level of being reliable enough in the red zone. So I think they're the kind of offense that I look at. I don't feel particularly worried about any of the defenses that they're going to face. And yeah, I want to lean into the Rams heavily this year.
Yeah, I love the call out of the Rams. I mean, I think we're going to see Puka and Devontae Adams clear if they're both healthy, of course, but clear pretty easily a 50% target share in that offense. Like, there's not much else going on. I think you can throw. I've been throwing plenty of darts at Tyler Higbee, at the end of drafts too, in that stack. And I love Terrence Ferguson as a prospect, but I seems like one of those situations where it's more of that dynasty vibe as opposed to maybe happening this year. I mean, I hope it happens this year just for my brand and the dynasty bags. But I do think that even Tyler Higbee is someone that we can look to. And there's just not much outside of that. Like, how would they not see that high of a target share?
Well, yeah, and because of this, I ended up drafting a decent amount of Tutu Atwell because
right.
We know the Rams have run 3 wide receiver sets at some of the heaviest rates in the league over the last 2 years, and Demarcus Robinson was the guy who was benefiting from that and benefiting to the tune of like wide receiver 3 weeks. And so they prioritize signing Tutu Atwell, and I'm willing to go and say, round 18, 19, 20?
Sure.
I'm just comfortable leaning into one of the convictions I have on a good offense.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Panthers. I got to shout out Bryce Young he might be my highest roster quarterback at this point.
Dude's going to run more, isn't he? Like, you look at the splits down the back end and just like his sack avoidance, his practically every advanced stat that you look at, it was just night and day to the first 3 weeks of the season, where when he got benched, I just assumed we were never going to see him start again.
He's toast. Yeah.
And I like what the Panthers have done this season. I think their defense looks like it's going to be a real problem for them again. They look to be kind of lacking in talent and depth. And then that just means good things for fantasy. We could see another pass-heavy script for them.
100%. Yeah, him and Drake May, both of their ADPs have just been kind of too strange. Easy. Bryce feels like he should be about a round higher than he goes in that format. But I'll take it. I'll be continuing to draft those Panthers. Are there any players that you're just straight up avoiding at cost right now?
Yeah, so this is always one where it potentially can get you into trouble. Like the last couple of years, there's been players who I've completely faded, who've come back to burn me. Alvin Kamara last year was somebody who I got hurt quite badly by, but James Cook is that guy this year. 1% owned through 170, 180 drafts so far. Led fantasy in touchdowns last year, but 39% of his total points came from the touchdowns, and he was only 24th in total yardage. I mean, that just makes me think that he's primed for total regression. I think Ray Davis is going to see an expanded workload. The Bills aren't famous for giving rookies huge amount of workloads straight away, but Ray Davis felt like he earned it. So I'm very much just kind of out on James Cook. But what I would say is that if you believe James Cook is going to get any kind of contract extension, then now would be the time to draft him before he sees a bump in ADP. DeAndre Swift, 1% on him as well. always plays himself out of a role. And I think
Yeah.
the price is kind of fair, but it's more that range in drafts. Like you look at Jordan Addison, Debo Samuel, Roma Dunze. I prefer taking shots on him. Trevion Henderson, RJ Harvey, James Conner are all guys that I feel better about. So it's quite difficult for me to pass all those guys up for him. And then the last two I'll give you as a combination. And this is definitely one which could sting me, but Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, I'm at 1% on both of them. Mm-hmm. And part of this just comes from the last couple of years. Matt Nagy has just really made this offense not fun to watch, not fun to draft for fantasy. And it's just hard to avoid the fact that, like, Travis Kelce, he only forced 3 missed tackles last year. He ranked 26 out of 31 tight ends in yards after the catch. And he just doesn't seem to have any juice. Maybe he can get there in PPR. But I just feel like there are better bets that I want to make.
I love the call out. I think Travis Kelce is the most overdrafted player on the board on DraftKings right now. It doesn't make any sense to me based on he's being drafted basically where he finished last year. And where he finished last year was in an offense that didn't have Rashee Rice in it and had a rookie Xavier Worthy and didn't have Hollywood Brown. And if you look at his split in those first few games with Rashee Rice, he was seeing like a 14% target share. I mean, he was averaging like 5 PPR points per game. It was absolutely horrendous. He kind of got by on volume, but all of his efficiency metrics were putrid last year. I mean, it was clearly, of course, bounce backs can happen and anything's possible. But I think in this case, when you're talking about an aged tight end, when they show you something like this, it's probably smart to err on the side of caution as opposed to leaning into the opposite happening, with a guy like Kelce.
Yeah, and part of this comes back to my Ravens bias as well. But I don't understand why Mark Andrews is going behind Travis Kelce at this point. If we're fading Mark Andrews because of Isaiah Likely, then the Rashee Rice point is even more of an issue, because the way Isaiah Likely wins on the field is different to how Mark Andrews wins. Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce, they play a very similar kind of game. So it's strange to me. And yes, Mark Andrews got there massively through touchdown. Josh Norris pointed out that Mark Andrews had 15 red zone touchdowns and walked away with 11 touchdowns last year, which is prime for regression. But I have more conviction in Mark Andrews than Travis Kelce by a country mile.
Yeah, especially at cost, right? I mean, he's going well after him. I've gotten a decent amount of Noah Gray just to kind of hedge against the Travis Kelce love on DraftKings, and knowing that Gray had he might have a handful of usable weeks this year, and then also if there's an injury that happens, he would be the starting tight end for Kansas City.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the perfect kind of like late dart throw on DraftKings that is much easier than on an 18-round format.
Yeah, 100%. All right, last question. Who are you overweight on this year? Who are the guys that you like? It's always easier to talk about the guys that you like than the guys that you're more fading or avoiding. But who are some of the guys that you're overweight on? Yeah,
so Trey McBride, 15% is probably my most overweight in the first few rounds. I mean, look, probably don't need to dwindle on Trey McBride too long. If positive touchdown regression can literally ever hit for Trey McBride, then, I mean, as we would say over here in England, we're quids in. I just think the volume of receptions and targets that he earns is so impressive, and he's a very easy click for me. Calvin Ridley, I'm at 23% on him. Like, people are down on Ridley. He's going pretty much similar to where he went last year with Will Levis, and Will Levis just destroyed his fantasy value. Like, among wide receivers with 50 plus catches last year, Ridley ranked 78th in catchable target rate. That was out of 85 qualifying players. Then when Ridley did have the ball, he ranked 15th in missed tackles forced, 8th in yards per reception. I'm just counting on Cam Ward to be better. Like, already talked about that with the stacks. I think the offensive line is going to help Cam Ward hit the ground running to a reasonable level where at least these players look undervalued. I'm not saying they're league winners. And then I've got one more tight end, and this is one who people who've watched my content have probably heard me talk about quite a bit, but Sam Laporta at round 7 feels really undervalued to me because he averaged, 7 fantasy points per game through the first 7 weeks last year, but it seemed quite clear that he'd been playing through injuries. He dealt with a little bit during training camp. And then from week 8 onwards, he was averaging 13.2 points per game. I mean, when if you were talking about wide receivers, that wouldn't be remotely interesting. But when we're talking about tight ends, that's really solid production. And while touchdown regression was always coming for him last year after his incredible rookie season with 9 touchdowns, it just doesn't take very much to swing back in your favor at the tight end position. So yeah, I think Sam Laporta is possibly a round or 2 underdrafted for me, and I'm very comfortable drafting a lot of him.
Love it. Tom, this was great. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you're working on, where they can watch your live streams, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so written work all over at fantasypros.com. Our best ball guide is out now. Lots of stuff about different roster construction strategies, my favorite ways to spread out exposure, all in there. Every Monday, myself and Andrew Erickson are live on Fantasy Pros channel, drafting, talking strategy, all that kind of good stuff. You can also catch me on the Fantasy Sanctuary, my channel with Rich and Tyler. Mondays are best ball live streams every single week. I also draft over on FFPC on there. And lots of strategy videos. I've got a video coming out this week about how rookie tight ends feel like they've been the cheat code the last 2 years, and talking about how much I love Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland at their current prices. So very much excited to see how people feel about that, whether I'm being a little too high on them or whether people are ready to get burned potentially.
Yeah, love it. I really appreciate your time. You guys can find me and all my stuff over on lateround.com. Make sure you are not pre-ordering, but ordering the Late Round Draft Guide, because that is now live. Very happy that that's live, because now I can sleep a little bit and like catch up on some Netflix shows, watching some Squid Game right now, that kind of stuff. So appreciate all of you guys for listening. And as always, thanks for tuning in.